stories, real people, and we get to see behind the scenes. And that's what I absolutely love about this podcast, the fact that I get to host and I get to talk to people like Warren. Warren, thank you for being here. I'm really excited to hear a little bit more of behind the scenes of why you got to where you're getting. Thank you again for being here, man.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I absolutely love the concept of narrative. And, we all have a story. Every man, every woman, every boy and girl has a story. And we're all living into that story and growing into that story. And for me, this is a joy just to be able to dive into that together.
Yeah, I so appreciate that. So let's go ahead and jump in, get started. Let's start with what we always start with. We just met in an elevator. Who is Warren? I can give you 30 to 90 seconds. Who is Warren?
Yeah, so I'm a husband. I've been married for almost 27 years. A dad. I've got two kids. One's a graduate from college, and others about to graduate from high school. And I'm a leader, and I've been serving in different kinds of ministry and nonprofit leadership for the last 30 plus years. I'm currently the national director of Impact Players, which is an organization focused on inspiring men to be great husbands, fathers, and leaders by equipping them to thrive in the relationships that matter most. So this is right up my alley.
Awesome. Well, it sounds like, too, you're in that season. I know I've been through that season of a child graduating, going off to college. That's a close of a chapter and the start of another chapter. And as men, we go through that. So maybe we'll get into it. Maybe we won't. We have to wait and see. So,
yeah, absolutely.
But all right. So starting out in looking at our lives, we all have beliefs, and we get those beliefs from those experiences or through something that somebody has said. So what were the beliefs that you had starting or before you were an adult, but really as kind of growing, maturing as an individual? What were some of those beliefs that were formed? Excuse me. What were some of those beliefs that were formed from your childhood?
Yeah, I think when you start talking about narratives, typically there's not just one narrative. And so I'll just kind of point to a couple of narratives for me. One was that I grew up in a home where I was loved, where I felt safe and supported by my family. I was introduced to faith and the Lord at an early age. And so there was a part of my narrative that was very healthy, which was, hey, you can do whatever you want to do. And so I look back now, and it's almost humorous to think about how self-assured I was at a young age. And that part of my story really, resonates throughout my entire life. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. But another part of my story is not as positive. And that is when I got into first grade as a young child, it became clear to this young teacher who had just gotten out of school and was now teaching for the first time. It became clear to her that I had dyslexia. And so I got diagnosed. That caused me to have to repeat kindergarten again. So I got pulled out of that first grade classroom, put back into kindergarten, kind of set into special classes a couple hours a day for the next 3 to 4 years. And that really kind of created this narrative in me that I'm not a good student, that I'm not good at school, that I'm never going to be successful in that area of my life. And so that was a part of my own story that really resonated for a long, long time with me. And, so you've kind of got these dueling narratives, right? That one is like, hey, you can do whatever you want to do. You can be successful. You're loved. You're God's child, all of those things. And yet also there's something wrong with you. You're dyslexic. Everything is harder for you than it seems like it is for everybody else. And you'll never be successful in the classroom. And so I went through my middle school and high school years trying to compensate for that insecurity about dyslexia by really pursuing hard after popularity. And for me, that was kind of achieved by being a class clown. And so I have an ability to make people laugh. I had people, tell me you're funny. I had an ability to kind of turn phrases and make people, think that I was the funny guy in the classroom. And so I just became wrapped up in that identity that I can't be good in school, but I can make people laugh. So I'll do that. And that really kind of drove me for most of my middle school and high school years until I had a personal life changing encounter with the Lord, and then it was like my identity shifted again from class clown to kind of this spiritual leader role.
Mm.
And what's interesting about that is that, like, you would think, okay, well, that would just wipe away any of the insecurities that you have about dyslexia, but it didn't. I
Mm.
actually convinced myself that I didn't need to be good at school. I didn't need to try hard at school because now I'm a spiritual leader and I'm just serving Jesus, and that's all that matters. And so, Tim, it was actually,
Can I pause you though, because I think this
yeah,
is a really really key element. So let's scroll back here just a little bit, in the aspect of I'm pretty confident that parents, teachers, they were looking out for your best interest, right? And I think that they had good intentions, and I think that they were attempting to do something that was for you, not against you, but actually for you, right? But yet, as a child, you interpret that as in, I am broken, I am not healthy, I got this problem, and I'm just never going to be good at it. And so can we just kind of break that? Maybe one, identify that first, but then the second part of it is just how quickly we accept that, and maybe just kind of break part of that down and say, why do we accept that stuff so quickly? Why do we just blindly, like, oh yeah, I'm broken? And then, like, at some point in time, I'm sure we have to discuss this, is how do we then break that belief? How do we break that concept that we convinced ourselves, like you just said, we convinced ourselves we're going to be that way.
yeah, I think, as kids, the acceptance that we receive from our peers is a really high value. I mean, perhaps no more so than when you're in middle school. I had the opportunity to be a youth pastor working with 12 through 18-year-olds for about 17 years in my life. And so I know very well how profoundly important the the value of being accepted by your peers really is. And so I think anytime a kid is pulled out of a classroom of his peers and told he needs to go to a special teacher to get help in something that apparently is easy for everyone else to do, that's going to create some of those negative, reinforcements that there's something wrong with me. Um, but then I think over time you just kind of begin to suppress that and try to overcome it with other things. So it's not like every day I woke up thinking I'm broken, there's something wrong with me, but I just kind of made the decision, okay, school's never going to be my thing, so I'll do, I was a college tennis player, so I'll pour myself into tennis, I'll pour myself into my spiritual walk, I'll pour myself into being the class clown, leadership, whatever that might be. But it was actually in college where, for me, there was a bit of a turning point as it relates to this first major narrative that we're talking about. And I was blessed to meet an amazing young lady that wanted to date me. And so we started dating, and our freshman year, she had a 4.0. I had a 2.7 GPA. So I was on academic probation with the tennis team, in risk of losing a tennis scholarship. And this young lady said to me, she said, "Warren, you're smarter than this. You can do better than this. Why don't you take one semester to just give your very, very best and see what happens?" And so I took her up on that challenge, because, number one, because I wanted to see myself, and number two, I didn't want to lose her. And so I took her up on that challenge. And after that first semester, or after that semester of trying, I had all A's except for one B plus. And for me, that was a breakthrough moment because
Why?
what I realized was that I had been using dyslexia as a crutch and an excuse for laziness, and that I was able to do better than I thought I could do as a student if I really, really pushed through that. And what I've come to learn since then is that my dyslexia is actually a superpower. And if you've ever read any of Malcolm Gladwell's books, he's got a great book, David and Goliath. In the book, he talks about people with dyslexia, and one of the things that we people with dyslexia learn to do is think differently. And so now I look back on my life and I go, oh man, like that ability that I have to kind of see things from a different angle, to think creatively, to solve problems in a way that other people don't necessarily see. That's a part of that gift of dyslexia that I had all those years ago, learning to rewire my brain in a way that works for me. And so I think, again, that turning point was that challenge to say, why don't you give your best and see what happens?
Mm.
And I think if you want to just boil it down to anybody that might be listening to this podcast, where they're at, they may not be struggling with dyslexia. They may have some other struggle. But I think especially men, there is this deep narrative for many men out there that say, what if I try my best and my best is not good enough? And I think that is the risk that oftentimes keeps men from stepping out, from going for their dream, for pursuing their passion, for being the very best that they can be, because they're afraid to find out that their best is not good enough. And I think that at the end of the day, if I had tried my best and not gotten, great grades, I would have still known that I could do better than what I was doing before that point. And I think that's the goal, is to be your best, and your best is good enough, especially in light of knowing who you are in relationship to God.
So when you're looking at this whole aspect, there's a couple of questions there that come up, but the motivation seemed to be the girl, but yet there had to be the discipline, the internal discipline to fulfill on that, because I'm sure the external motivation is not going to last forever, right? I mean, so when you look at whether it's a semester or a year and doing your best, how do you differentiate then between somebody that is willing to kind of encourage you or strengthen you and say, yeah, you should probably challenge that belief, versus the actual, I need to have some discipline to actually try to do my best?
Yeah. There's a verse in the book of First John that says, perfect love casts out all fear. And I think that, like I said, there's this fear that has the ability to motivate, right? Like you can be motivated for a season because you're afraid of losing the girl, because you're afraid of getting in trouble, you're afraid of losing your scholarship. But then there's a deeper motivation that comes from love. And when you know that you're loved, when your identity is rooted in who you are as a child of God, and you know that you're loved, and then secondly, when you love others and you love yourself, then the motivation is it moves into that uh, fearless motivation.
Mm.
And I think for me, that was part of my journey and continues to be a part of my journey. I don't have it all figured out yet by any means whatsoever. But like, as a dad, as a husband, I get up every morning and I lay it all out on the line because I love my family and I love my wife and I want to give them the very best. I want to do my best to provide for my family and to care for my family. So so love motivates me to keep pushing and keep striving, even when there might be that, inner narrative of fear or discouragement or doubt that can always creep in.
Right. So as you're looking at your life, what were the other transitions or the perspective shift that you came across in looking, whether it was in college or even just fresh out of college? What were some of the other perspective shifts that you had?
Yeah, so after that kind of breakthrough moment, I think for me, I entered into a season where um, I was able to really put a lot of my life into drive. And so, there were times where I had my foot all the way down on the gas pedal, other times where, I was kind of cruising, but I was moving forward. And the word success is kind of an ambiguous word because success can mean
Depends on
totally
how you
different
define it.
things to every person that you talk to.
Hmm.
But in my perspective, really the next 15 years or so were very successful. Everywhere I went, the organizations that I was leading, the ministry that I was in charge of, it grew, it was thriving. There was a sense of reward and significance in everything I did. And so for me, the kind of the next big narrative hurdle was moving out to the Seattle, Washington area to start a church. And like I said, for the previous 15, 20 years before that, I had just experienced a lot of success in everything I had done. So when you experience that level of success, you come to believe that that's your destiny and that's a guarantee. Getting out here, trying to start a church in the least churched city in America, I came across, or I came up against a level of struggle and sense of, impotence in terms of getting things done that I had not experienced up to this point. And so we slugged it out for 8 years, trying to scratch and claw and pray and serve to build a church. And we did build a church, and we were able to start two other churches, but at the same time, it took a massive toll on us. And so after that 8 year period, um, we came to a point where we decided we need to step away.
Hmm.
And for me, that felt like a failure. And so there was this kind of this new struggle that I was experiencing for the first time, which was, really kind of tied back to that question that we talked about earlier, which is, what if my best isn't good enough? And that's what it felt like for me. And in addition to that, there was this, I think this thought that exposed something in me, and it was this thought that, okay, now that I'm a failure, God's done with me. Like I'm damaged goods. I He's not gonna be able to use me again. I tried, I failed, so I might as well just go hide in a corner for the rest of my life. And I wrestled with that for a little while, but it was in that process of really, asking deep questions and why am I feeling this way and where's this coming from, that I really felt like the Lord said to me, hey, number one, I'm not done with you. Number two, I'm not done with you in ministry. Number three, I'm not done with you in Seattle. I've got a plan for you. And again, I kind of reoriented my life and my mission around who I was and who I felt I was called to be. And I just, reached out to the leader of an organization called Impact Players, which is the organization I now lead nationally. And I said, hey, I just feel this calling to invest in men and to help disciple them to be great husbands, fathers, and leaders. What would you think about me taking 8 guys and just investing in them over 7 weeks? Just a very simple idea. And he said, yeah, let's do it. So we started that group. And Tim, that was kind of another awakening for me, because it showed me that, and I think this is important for a lot of people, especially men. What it showed me was that my calling, my value, and my identity was not tied to my vocation.
Mm.
Okay. So I thought that my calling, value, and identity was tied to the fact that I was a pastor of a church. And now I was not a pastor of a church. In fact, at that time, I didn't even have a job. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. But I learned in that I could be all that God created me to be, um, with or without a title, with
Hmm.
or without a great LinkedIn profile. And I think that's an important thing for a lot of us guys, especially, to really nail down in our lives. And sometimes we don't learn those lessons until that career gets stripped away from us, or until we fail in a way that is, beyond what we thought we could ever handle.
Yeah. Yeah. And isn't it interesting? So I'm a little bit dyslexic as well. I switch stuff around all the time. My wife laughs at me, and then I'll say wrong words, and I'll do all that kind of stuff. And
Oh yeah.
I was horrible at phonics. I mean, like I can't see the letter. Anyway, it's interesting to me. And I don't know if you see this correlation. It's interesting to me how oftentimes, and it just clicked when you were saying this, is as dyslexic people, we think creatively. We have to learn how to learn differently, basically. And it's a superpower. And it's
Yeah.
something that when we look at our lives, we can quickly take all of the letters and all of the pieces of our lives and rejumble them and have them read that script. And we can read it successfully, whereas maybe somebody else can't read that successfully, but we've
Yeah.
got the ability to do that. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting correlation between our lives
Yeah.
and our ability as far as the dyslexic aspect of it. But yeah, it
Yeah.
definitely.
And I don't know if this is true for everybody with dyslexia, but in a separate kind of self test that I did, one of the things that came up was that I have an extremely high tolerance for ambiguity.
Hmm.
There are those that, like, they need to know exactly what's going to happen. They have to have all the details, or they're going to just fall apart. For whatever reason, I have a very, very high tolerance for ambiguity, which is absolutely essential if you're going to be an entrepreneurial type leader, where things are not clear and not easy, or laid out for you, and you've got to try to build the plane while you're in the air.
Yeah.
So again, I don't know if that's directly tied to the dyslexia, but I
Well,
think that there's got to be some correlation there.
yeah, you actually got me my brain working, and I'm thinking like, I wonder how many people listening are dyslexic, because we that's our primary target, our primary audience, and people that are here are primarily either entrepreneurs or some type of a leader or some type. They're dealing with chaos every day. People are
Yeah.
always dealing with chaos and ambiguity. See, there you go. Ambiguity is definitely a part of everyone's life. So that's an interesting thing. I'm going to have to kind of maybe do some research on that. But all right, so as we're looking at your current life, what are the habits and the routines that you practice daily, or things that you set as a priority in your own personal life that allow you to function fully, to show up and help others? We all know that there are certain things that we have to practice in order to be able to come with the ability to serve others or with the ability to help others. So what are the things that you do that give you the strength and the energy to show up in that manner?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's good. And like I said, because I have this high tolerance for ambiguity, because I'm in this career field in which chaos is a daily routine. It's so important that you do have a few things in your life that you can really, really count on.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount how there are two types of people that build their lives on the rock, and people that build their lives on the sand. And the sand is sexy and it's fun, and it's the place that everybody wants to be, is on the beach, right? But it's those that build their lives on the rock that are going to last and persevere through the storms. And so for me, one of those rocks that I build every single day on is the time that I spend every morning in prayer, in reflection on Scripture, journaling what the Lord is revealing to me through those times. And Tim, sometimes those uh, things that time can last 30 minutes. Sometimes it can last 90 minutes, just depending on how much I can invest in it. But for me, that is a non-negotiable. I would say, secondly, making sure that I have relational connection with the people that I love the most. And so obviously that, is my wife, my children, my friends, and my church. And so I am continually examining my life and my schedule and my allotment of time, and asking myself, am I allotting the proper amount of time to make sure that each of these relationships is healthy and vibrant and moving in a positive direction? Because if I don't have those relationships, and if I don't have that spiritual undergirding, then my natural persona would be to work 144 hours a week. It's just the way I'm wired. And, me working 144 hours a week is not a healthy recipe for anybody. And so that's kind of I would say the two big factors. I'll say one other thing. I mentioned that I was a collegiate tennis player, and I still coach tennis to this day. And one of the things that I learned as a tennis player is mental toughness. And there's a principle that I kind of call competitive focus. So when the pressure is high, when the nerves are really starting to flare up, to have the ability to really just narrow your depth of field, narrow your focus onto one thing, and not let anything else distract you from that. And so I think that's something that I try to do regularly, is just to say, okay, eliminate the chaos and focus on the one thing that is in front of me right now. And in an ADD world, that is something that takes great discipline. But if you can train yourself to do it, it really pierces through a lot of the confusion that we face in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we wind up and wrap down, what would be the one thing, if you were to look back on yourself and maybe somebody else's list, what would be that one thing that you would want to share, not to try to save yourself from the struggle, but to let yourself know that you can get through it. You can become stronger because of this.
Yeah. So I think, the way I would kind of summarize or give a moral to some of my story is this: that this question that we ask, what if I do my best and my best is not good enough? That's the wrong question. That's the wrong question. Because the right question is, who defines whether I am good enough? All right. If I want to let my boss, or my parents, or my wife, or some other critic who writes a comment on social media define whether I'm good enough, I'm going to get torn in 1,000 different directions. But ultimately, the answer for me to that question is, what does God say about me? And what God says about me is that because of Christ and what he did for me, I am good enough. There's a famous Christian author named A.W. Tozer, and he said that the most important thing about a person is what comes to their mind when they think about God. And I've kind of added to that and said the second most important thing about a person is what comes to God's mind when he thinks about you. And if you know what that is, that's going to eliminate this never ending gnawing feeling that you're not good enough, that you're not doing enough, that you're not achieving enough. If you can just know what God says about you and remind yourself of that every single day, uh, it will overcome every other one of those questions that you may be wrestling with.
I love that. So how can people get in contact with you? What would be the best way? Something you said resonates. How can people get in touch with you?
Well, you and I met on LinkedIn, and
Right.
so you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook. The organization that I lead is Impact Players, and that website is impactplayers.org. And hit me up on any of those channels, and I'd be glad to get back. I'd love to hear your story and discover if there's a way that I can serve you in any way.
Yeah, and I love that heart that you have, and we end every episode with this exact same thing: is we do want to hear from people that are listening. How has this impacted you? Did we say something that resonates with you? And every guest that we have on here has that same heart. So thank you for saying that, and that is exactly what we end with. I mean, so as we look at this, again, appreciate you being here, Warren. And if somebody did hear something and you did, man, just reach out to us, because that's what really lights us up. It lights us up for the day, the week, the month, the year. It just really, really helps out in a massive way. All right. So until next time, keep writing and crafting your story, because every story is just as important, and you are valued, and you have a great story.
Thanks.